So, as I promised, I'm going to share with you the memory tricks I found that are very effective to memorize the vocabulary of a language. And as I indicated in my post, you can use these tricks even if you know just one language and you're learning a second language. But if you know more than one language, then it becomes a bit more exciting. And that's what I'm going to show you how. So, the first thing that I want to show you is memorizing this word, for instance. This is el otoño. Now, how I memorize it is I split the word into two. Otto Bismarck is one of the politicians that I'm fond of because I'm fond of history, so I know Bismarck. So his name is Otto von Bismarck. So that's how I memorize Otto. And Neo is somebody we know from the Matrix. So Neo is Neo. Now, the word substitution works well if you not just when you're memorizing the words, the new vocabulary, you not just say it, you also see it in your mind. So if I want to make it better, I would visualize Bismarck and Neo. And if I want to make it even better and want this word to stick, I would somehow build a silly story around it. Like, for example, Bismarck was not a really good guy in history, and he was definitely responsible for German unifications. But then you can come up with some story, like for example, Neo tried to stop Bismarck or something. Say for example, Bismarck was there, and it was the whole matrix, and Neo was there to stop the unification of the German Empire because he knew it will lead to the First World War. So what happened if you do that is that the word will stick in your mind. Like for example, I would never forget this word, el otro neo, because I have associated it with these two figures, one a real life personality and the other one a fiction. Another thing is that this word means autumn in Spanish, and in Spanish, all the nouns have gender. So that is why it's important when you're memorizing the noun that you memorize. El is used for masculine. So it's a good strategy that you memorize el, or while you're memorizing the vocabulary itself. Or if it were a feminine, we would say la, you'd use la. So that's why I have this el otoño. And this word means autumn. Now I will show you how it works when we use the words from two languages. So here's the word despejado, that means clear sky. Now, in order to memorize this word, I break it into four parts, and I have despejado. Now, in Spanish, J is pronounced as ha, so it's not ja, it's ha. So, despejado, that's the word I want to memorize. So, what I do, I use the word das. So, das means 10 in Urdu, P means drink in Urdu, ha is the ha, and do means give in Urdu. So what I did now, in order to memorize this word, I use four different words, and here you can see that I I pretty much use the Urdu words. Now, this is what I want to emphasize on when I said that if you know more than one language, it becomes easier because you get the variety. Because whenever we are memorizing some new vocabulary, uh, it is easier if you make it, if you want to make it stick, it's easier to associate it with something you already know. Now, for example, this despejado, a good strategy would be that you come up with a story. For example, you drink 10 glasses of anything you want to say, and then the guy said, don't, is enough. And you said, give me more. Now, if you want this really to stick, you need to imagine drinking something that is exotic, something like something you have seen in some kind of sci-fi. That is always a good thing because that way it sticks. Like for example, for me, it would be the spice, and the spice. When I refer to spice, I'm referring to Dune trilogy. So, so spice has a very specific meaning in Dune trilogy. So, drinking 10 glasses of spice is something that nobody can do, and it makes your mind infinite in terms of uh, and it makes you supernatural. So and it's also very dangerous. So imagining doing that would make it easier for me to remember this word, despejado. Now the same thing I would be doing this with this word. As you can see, I have broken it into three parts. Granizo. Now here what I will do, I will use two languages instead of one. So the word gira, for gira, I'm using the word gira, that means not in Urdu. So that's the Urdu word I'm using. For knee, I'm using the word knee. Again, it's an English word. And in order to stick zo, I'm using the word zoo, that is close enough. Now, again, here, uh, having two languages at my disposal make it easier for me. And you know, another thing that happened is that when you incorporate two different languages in memorizing a single word, that itself make it pretty much easy to remember. Because the thing with the mind is that the mind always remembers things that are unique, that are different, and that stand out. So you would not remember what you have seen in the morning today when you go out to buy some grocery, but you would remember the first time you went and see some monument, even if that happened ages ago. Because that memory was an outstanding memory. That event was outstanding. So that's why the mind remembers it. Whereas going out to buy groceries is pretty mundane. So this is what this whole technique is all about. It's making the vocabulary that you're trying to remember stand out. And here again, you can come up with a story that you're trying to tie a knot, and then there was a huge knee of a giant in the middle of a zoo, and you're trying to tie a knot and trying to make that giant stop from destruction and all that. Stop trying to make that giant stop from doing destruction. So again, if you visualize a story around it, it will make it easier for you to remember. And then it's better to associate something related to hail, and it was hailing at that time. So that was also something that would make it easier for you to remember. Now, again, the word primavera means spring. So this is a feminine word, so it's la primavera. And here again, I broke the word into three. Now you can see that the way I'm breaking the word is based on the pronunciation. And again, tree is something I associate with preschool. So ma is the word ma in Urdu, that means mom. And Vera is aloe vera. Now I can come up with a story that a preschool boy was with his mother, and then he was, uh, and then they saw a giant olive tree in the garden, and then the kid decided to climb it. So again, The whole idea of coming up with the story is that if you come up with a story when you're memorizing a new word, it make it stick. Now, here, another thing that you can do when you're using two languages, it becomes a bit easier. Like for example, the word argo, that means to do or to make. Here, what I did was I can use the word in English, but when I use the Urdu word it makes it and go, it makes it unique. So even if I'm not coming up with any story, just by mixing two languages, that makes the whole word stand out. And at least I found it very effective and it works pretty well for me. Now, last but not least, another technique that I want to share with you is that this is also word substitution, but it is slightly different from what we are doing right now. So here we are trying to memorize the words of a foreign language by using them in the sentences of the language that we know of. Like, for example, in Spanish, you have the verb also changes based on the subject. So, for instance, hago is the verb that we use when the subject is first person. Ese is when the subject is second person. Hicimos when the subject is first person, but instead of saying I, we are saying me. Now, in these three examples, what I want to show you is this. You can see that, for instance, for me, uh, if I'm learning some new language, like for example, Spanish, I'm pretty new to it. It's often at times difficult to make sentences. And even if you do make sentences in Spanish, I find it easier when I use the Spanish verbs in English rather than going and making sentences in Spanish. Like, for example, I hago coffee for you instead of saying I make coffee for you. Now, why I find this to work better is that something that we always do. Like, for example, if I'm Spanish, speaking Spanish, and then suddenly I get stuck and I don't remember, say, for example, a particular word in Spanish. So what I would do is I would substitute that word with a word in English. So for example, if I want to say I make coffee for you in Spanish and I don't know certain words, I would say yo make cafe para tu, or maybe yo make cafe for you. So this is pretty common. Like whenever we are speaking a new language and we don't know the words of that new language, we often substitute the word with a word that from a language that we know. And this is how you would be like for example, you're speaking a foreign language and then suddenly you're stuck and you don't know the exact word. The word that pop up in your mind is the word from your language. So that is something your mind does automatically whenever you're speaking a language, a newer language. It brings you the words from the language you already know. So when you start, so what this technique does, it turns it around. So instead of replacing the words of the language I know in the sentences of a foreign language, I'm using the words of foreign language in the sentences of my own language. And it makes those words stand out and that becomes easier for me to remember. So if I want to memorize the word aser for like these different forms of aser, it is easier for me to make sentences and they stick pretty well in my mind. I a go cafe for you, or you assess coffee for me, or we hacemos coffee for you, coffee for you. this becomes easier for me to remember and they stick out because they make this verb stand out much more than if I make sentences in Spanish itself. And second thing is that, like, for me, as I'm saying, that I'm very new to the language, so at times it's even difficult for me to use a particular word in the sentences. So in that scenario, when I'm learning a language and I'm in the very beginner stage, using this approach make it easier for me to remember stuff. So that's pretty much it, and I hope you all find it useful. Thank you.